This is the Masterwork Model 570. It's a full stereo setup with all the styling that would make it right at home in your mid-century college apartment. Chrome knobs, fake wood, brushed metal. You guys know this is exactly my taste when it comes to stereo stuff. And the best part, it records 8 tracks. I'm excited because I finally get to record something on an 8-track and play it back for you at the end. So let's jump in. As I stated previously, this is the Masterwork Model 570. It's a complete stereo system, not unlike a lot of the other 8-track machines that I've shown. But this one is the first that I've actually managed to find with the original matching speakers, and it all works. But before I show you the unit itself, I want to mention something quickly to those of you who do the whole estate sale thing. The guy who owned this previously was a chiropractor from what I could tell. He had a bunch of the tools and the equipment everywhere. Weirdly, he also had a ton of old stereo gear, but it was spread all over the house. There were single speakers in one room and their twin was in a totally different room, both of which were hooked up to equipment. This machine was in a bedroom and the speakers were in the living room behind a chair on the floor. I wish I could show you the house. It was huge. The only picture that they let me take was of the awesome wallpaper in one of the bathrooms. You want to talk about mid-century. The point being, if you're the type who goes to estate sales, keep in mind that things get separated in people's houses all the time, especially after the estate sale company comes in. Whether it's 80s clothes like my wife collects or stereo stuff like I'm into, if you see something that looks like it's part of a set, take the time to look around the house because more often than not, the other piece is sitting somewhere in a closet or in the garage or somewhere. It's worth it to take the time to look for it. So with that said, let's take a look at this thing. The front has all the 70s styling that I love. The toggle switch for the power button, the green backlit radio dial, the faux wood. Obviously I'd love real wood, but I appreciate the fake wood too since it's got a 70s campy, charming cheapness to it. I'm for it. When you turn the power on, the radio dial automatically comes on, regardless of the setting. It basically acts as your power light. Below that are 6 matching chrome knobs. From left to right, you have your volume, your balance, your bass, your treble, the function knob, which selects all but one of the inputs. I'll explain that later. And finally, the tuner. They didn't make the tuner knob any larger, nor did they hook it to a flywheel, so it's not the most comfortable thing in the world to use, but it does work. And it's the only knob without a white pointer, so at least it stands apart. So let's look at the functions starting with the phono. This has a hookup for a turntable with a ceramic type cartridge. If you have a higher end turntable with a moving magnet or moving coil, they recommend against using it rather than any suggestion of hooking up a preamp. But I imagine if you have a halfway decent turntable, chances are you're not trying to route it through something like this anyway. And after fiddling around with it, I think you could get away with using a preamp since the speaker fidelity isn't high enough that you'd notice a difference. I really think it'd be fine. The AM function is a built-in AM radio that has an internal bar antenna. The tuner scale is down here on the bottom. Something I thought was cool with this machine was that it's got automatic static filtering so it doesn't hiss when you're looking for a station. It does that on not just the AM, but the FM and FM stereo functions as well. Also, when you're set to either of those FM functions, stereo stations will be indicated with this red stereo light, but only the FM stereo function has the stereo multiplexing ability. The mic function is connected to these 2 inputs under the tape garage. They're monaural 1/8-inch audio jacks, one for each channel. The most obvious purpose of this would be to record to a tape if you have really important thoughts that need to be kept for posterity. Otherwise, I think you could also use this setup as an aux input for small public addresses like that wildly inappropriate speech your uncle gave at your cousin's wedding last year. You remember the one. The tape function is pretty obvious. It's how you would play a tape back. But there are a few quirks here. Firstly, if a tape is inserted in the machine, it will always be running regardless of what setting is selected. The tape function merely serves to select the tape as the audio output through the speakers. But there's actually a good reason for that. It's not just lazy design. Remember that 8-tracks generally don't have transport controls. Of course, some of them do, but usually stop and play are just controlled by inserting or removing the cartridge. Because of that, if you want to record to the tape, you need the tape to be running when any of the other inputs are selected. To play a tape, you just pull it into the hanger and it'll automatically start running. The 4 programs can be cycled with the big chrome program button. To the left of that, you have these neat purplish lights that indicate which program is running. For the uninitiated, the program refers to which pair of stripes are being played on the tape itself. Changing the program simply moves the playback head up and down inside the transport. So 4 pairs of right and left channels is 8 total stripes, ergo 8-track. To the right of the program button is another toggle switch labeled SQ adapter. This serves 2 functions. Back when this machine was made, quadraphonic sound was striving to be the next big thing. That's 4-channel audio, which is really cool. And for a while, there were even quad records and quad radio broadcasts. The thing is, you had to have special equipment to decode the signal and get those 4 discrete audio channels, the hardware for which they did not include inside this machine. The SQ adapter switch essentially acts exactly the same as a tape monitor button on most other amplifiers. It routes the signal out the back to go through whatever piece of equipment you hook it to, be that a quad decoder or a tape recorder or an equalizer or whatever, then back into the amp to be played through the speakers. However, when you send the right kind of signal through an SQ decoder, that will have an additional pair of speaker outputs which will produce the rear 3rd and 4th audio signal. The front stereo signal is split and sent back into the deck, and you'd hear it through these. If you look closely at the tape head though, you might notice something missing. This doesn't play quad tapes. I mean, it does, just not all 4 channels of it at once, since there are only 2 pickups on the head itself. My guess is that they were working under the assumption that more and more FM stations were going to switch to 4-channel broadcasts, and they wanted to make the equipment work after that transition by providing a decoding adapter. You would of course also have to have an additional pair of speakers to hook it up to make it work. Now let's look at the record function. That's what I've been looking forward to this whole time. I can play you a recording demo at the end of the video. In fact, I'm going to. There are 3 main controls here. There's a red record button, a fast forward button, and an auto stop button with its associated indicator light, which doesn't come on until it actually stops. You'll see that later. To the right of those are the right and left record level controls and the meters which light up when the record button is pressed. Very green. To record a tape, first you want to set your input levels by pressing the record button and adjusting the knobs so that they're peaking just below the black bar. I found that this one seems to like about a medium record level, lower than that of a lot of cassette tapes that I've done. Once you're satisfied with the record levels and you have the correct input selected, in this case we'll be recording from the radio, you hold down the record button and insert your tape cartridge. It'll immediately start recording. Couple things to keep in mind here. Number 1, remember you can't rewind 8 tracks. So to hear what you recorded, you have to play the tape through a full program to get it back to where you were. That can be as much as 15 to 20 minutes depending on the length of the tape. Fortunately, there's a fast forward, which will reduce that time, but I don't necessarily trust the tape itself to handle that without getting tangled or breaking, so I tend to use that very sparingly. The auto stop feature works in conjunction with recording, allowing the machine to stop the transport once the tape has completed a full track. If you're not already familiar with 8 tracks, the tapes have a conductive foil splice that will trigger a pair of contacts in the player and make the head jump to the next track. If you engage the auto stop, that foil trigger will actually stop the whole transport. That allows you to stop the tape when it's completed whatever program it's on. This machine will just keep recording or playing until you tell it to stop. That's why the auto stop feature is helpful. You can use it to stop at the end of any program, but if you're recording something long, like say a full album or a radio broadcast, it's especially helpful to turn it on during the last program so it doesn't go back and record over the beginning of the tape that you already recorded when it gets to the end. Remember, you have no visual cues on the face to know how much tape is left, so that is really, really helpful. Another important distinction between cassettes and 8 tracks with respect to recording is there are no safety features to prevent overwriting previous recordings. That goes for blank tapes and recorded albums. The only thing they do here is disengage the button for a cartridge that's already inserted, but you could easily record over the great hits of 1967 if you wanted to. This machine does not differentiate between tapes. One other thing worth noting is that this particular deck doesn't have an erase head. Some 8-track recorders do, like the Akai behind me, but this one does not. It's just writing one signal over the other. That doesn't lend itself to the best recording quality and can sometimes result in bleed through of the old recording during quiet parts of the new one. Just something to keep in mind. However, there are solutions. So that's all the recording features. Let's flip it around and see the back. There is, of course, the plethora of warnings and specifications printed on the back panel. In this cutout, you have a bank of RCA jacks, the antenna hookups, and a powered AC plug. The power source is always on, regardless of the state of the machine. You can see the lamp works even when I turn the power off. Next to that are the grounded antenna hookups for an AM loop or an FM antenna. They use the typical spade connectors. Then you have your RCA speaker outputs, your tape out and SQ in ports, which we covered earlier, and finally the phono inputs, which don't have their own dedicated grounding screw, but if you can reach the antenna ground, that will work. All right, so we've seen the main unit. Let's take a quick look at the speakers. These are single cone, full range, 5-inch speakers housed in a 15 by 10 inch particle board cabinet that cannot be disassembled without damaging it. I'd like to be able to open one to show you, but they've glued everything together and I don't want to break it. Something I thought was interesting was the dark stripe on the face of this one. That's not damage. That's actually a manufacturing defect that managed to get past quality control, which I'm guessing was probably pretty lax. You can see the fabric itself doesn't have the second tan thread like it's supposed to. Or it does, it's just the wrong color. It was probably the end of the spool. Granted, there is a little bit of damage in other parts of the cloth in certain spots. Nonetheless, this is the whole set with the speakers and everything. I still think it looks pretty good, even though I fully acknowledge that it is not a high-end setup whatsoever. All right, so we've seen everything that it does. What say we get to the good part and actually hear the awesome high-fidelity recording quality of the Masterwork Model 570. I'm recording this in real time to the tape itself. Is it as clear as my digital audio recorder? No, not a chance. In fact, it's not that great. We might even need to throw some captions on the screen so that you can know what I'm saying. Or can you understand me? But that's it. That's the sound of this thing. Okay, I admit I was being facetious, but that was not the greatest. Nonetheless, I will be making a thrash metal mixtape so that I can finally blast Slayer on an 8-track player. Might even have to make some cool custom labels too, but that's future me's project. For now, I want to show you the inside of this thing. Getting it apart is kind of a headache, so I'm only going to pull the back off this time. To get the back off, it's just 4 little Phillips screws on either side. When you remove them, you can slide the back panel off and get a look inside. I had the whole thing open when I was testing it, and I don't really want to go through that process again. But you would remove the 8 chrome knobs and the nut that holds the 1/4-inch headphone jack on, because there's always a headphone jack. Then you just remove the 9 screws on the bottom. After that, the internals will slide out, but keep in mind there's 2 separate chassis held together by wires, so you have to be careful. On the right, you can see the assembly for the tape transport and all the electronics for everything else on the left. And there's the AM antenna. The little mechanism that controls the program lights is right there. Usually, if the lights don't work, that thing just needs contact cleaner and a few cycles and the lights will work again. So that's it for the Masterwork Model 570. At least all I can think of to say about it for now. I couldn't really find much info about this particular unit online, so if anyone knows anything about this machine that I missed, please, I encourage you to share in the comments. I'd love to know more about it. For me, I'd like to know whether or not this thing was ever connected to one of those Columbia House negative option billing things like the Columbia Cartridge Club, since Masterwork is the Columbia Records stereo brand. So if you know anything about that, please share. But until next time, keep thrifting and stay metal.